Well, hi and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In my most recent video I alluded to the fact that in my series on cricket, I would talk about cricketers who found faith and how does faith and cricket mix, and what are the benefits and what are the drawbacks, whatever. Those are the sort of things I'd like to talk about today. I was alluding to the book that I am still reading again at the moment, Neil Hawke, Bowled Over, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But I'd just like to go back and talk about some of the cricketers who are still playing and have recently retired and who were Christians. And I don't know whether that's necessarily affected how good they were as cricketers or in other sports, how good Christians are in other sports, but I think it does give you a different perspective. When I became a Christian, I had pretty much finished playing competitive sport, although I did make a brief comeback as a footballer after I'd become a Christian, and I found it a bit difficult to sort of feel at home in the locker rooms of typical sporting clubs. Only played a couple of games in that sort of a comeback, I guess, and I was getting that old where I had to finish up and retire anyway, although I was quite young compared to what I am now. But anyway, I'd just like to go back through some thoughts about cricketers and faith, and maybe people in other sports as well. One of the first people that come to mind and I've read about this gentleman and his brothers, was C.T. Studd. He was a very popular cricketer, him and his two brothers, back in the 19th century, I think it was, in England. And in fact, he was being touted as a future captain of England, C.T. Studd, but he came from a very wealthy family in England. Three brothers. His father had made a lot of money. His father became a Christian after hearing, I think it was D.L. Moody, come to England, and Ira Sankey doing some crusades in England. And so C.T. Studd's, Charles Studd's father, became a Christian. He then in turn influenced his three sons, and those three sons became dedicated Christians. And in fact, C.T. Studd and about 5 of his other graduates from Cambridge University actually chucked everything in and became missionaries. And C.T. Studd's story of being a missionary and how he continued after that is quite amazing. If you think about those three brothers, they were probably the equivalent of Australia's war brothers at the time, Mark and Steve, and I've forgotten the other young guy's Christian name as well. But they were very prominent and still are prominent in cricket circles. But these guys were the equivalent of them back in the 19th century, although they didn't go on to have long careers because they changed their direction quite drastically, even though they were dedicated cricketers. So I'm going to put a link underneath to a short autobiographical film about C.T. Studd underneath, and you can have a look at that and see what I'm talking about. There's lots of other contemporary cricketers that have become Christians, and a lot of the South African team, people like, past players, Peter Pollock and Sean Pollock, his son, and then more recently Faf du Plessis. And there were some other guys there, I think, as well. Who else did we have? A.B. de Villiers. They were both very prominent South African captains, and lots of the players in the South African teams have been Christians over the years. And in Australia, in our own current test team, Marnus Labuschagne has claimed to be a Christian as well. And he's a very exciting young player going ahead with his game. When you think about Christians influencing, I mean, when I was playing cricket, I didn't know too many Christian cricketers that were playing around at all, if any of them, except that there was one young guy who played in our C-grade team for West Torrens, who I played for, and we were about to play a grand final or a semi-final, and he pulled out of the team. He was our opening batsman, and he pulled out of the team because he went to church on Sundays. And I really couldn't fathom that at the time. I thought, wow, excuse me. I thought, wow, that is really quite something. Why would you do that? Because I was so keen on cricket. I knew he was keen on cricket. He was our opening batsman, but no, he stuck to his guns. I think he was in the Salvation Army. That impressed me, even though I probably never ever said that to him. I don't know. And then there was another young guy played in our teams back in those days who was only 16, and he was a very brilliant fast bowler. And but he didn't continue. He wasn't the sort of Christian that I am. He belonged to the Christadelphian faith, and they went to church on Saturdays. So he didn't go on with his cricket, but he could have been a world beater as a fast bowler. He was incredibly fast at the age of 16. And I thought, wow, you know, that's really putting your faith first and really showing a lot of dedication to what you believe. So I'll read a little bit about Neil Hawke in a minute. There were other cricketers. Brian Booth, who was playing when Neil Hawke was a test cricketer, was a dedicated Christian all the way through. And in fact, one night I listened to Neil Hawke being interviewed about his faith on a Christian radio program on a Sunday night in Adelaide. And Brian Booth came on as part of that program, which was quite interesting. And at the time, of course, I never knew that Brian Booth was a Christian when I was following cricket in those days, but he was a very elegant batsman for Australia and very strong in his faith. You think of some of the footballers back when I was playing football and following football, one of the top players in the Sturt football team, John Howard, he was on Sunday afternoon Christian television program, and that made you sit up and think when here's one of these your idols of the football world who's coming out as a Christian and not ashamed to talk about his faith. And that was impressive. In fact, many of the Sturt team were Christians, and some went into the ministry, I think. And likewise, when I was playing football at West Adelaide, there was a guy there training for the ministry as well. I think he was training for the Lutheran ministry. So there are people when you're playing sport that you're mixing with. Sometimes you know they are Christians, sometimes you don't. And I find it an intriguing experience or an interesting thing to think about. Would it make you more competitive or less competitive if you're a Christian and playing sport? I don't know. All of us who play sport have got that competitive nature anyway. And so I don't know that it makes a whole lot of difference. Maybe we're a bit fair-minded when we're dealing with the opposition, a bit more fair-minded when dealing with the opposition if we're Christians. So there you go. When I was, before I became a Christian and I was still playing football, I'd had a really bad run, and I'd had a tough time personally over the last couple of years leading up to this particular semi-final I was playing in once. Bearing in mind I wasn't a Christian, and I hadn't really played any good football all year, and I thought, well, I'm lucky to be in this team playing in this semi-final. And anyway, I was playing on the half-forward flank where you're required to kick goals for your team, and not a Christian, but my wife was. And I found myself praying to the God who I didn't really know, and I said, I'd really like to be able to do well in this game today. Can you please help me, or something along those lines, to play this game and to do well. And amazingly, I had the best first half of football in a game that I'd ever had. In the first half of the game, I actually kicked 4 goals, and they changed about 3 different players to try and quell my influence on the game. By half time, the game was all over. And I hardly got a kick in the second half. But I always thought that God had answered my prayer. And but whether God favours one team to win over another, who knows? That's a question for the theologians, isn't it? I don't think that's the case. But he certainly likes to speak to us as individuals, no matter what our situation is. So other people who influenced me, but after the event, really, when I was at school, I had a school teacher called Jeff Fuller, who was also the coach of our school footy team. And I never knew, but when he died, he was an amazing, inspirational person, great football coach, great teacher, and he'd also been a very top-line North Adelaide Australian rules football player. And I didn't know until I went to his funeral that he'd been a Christian. And this was alluded to in his written testimony, or the eulogy that was handed out certainly highlighted his Christian faith. And I thought, wow, there was this man who was a quite influence on all of us, and I thought that was very impressive. And then years later I went to the funeral of another sportsmaster at our school. I'll put a link to what I wrote about him on my blog, Ralph Hillman. He was a wonderful sports master at Henley High School where I went. And when I got to his funeral, I found out that he indeed had become a Christian later in his life and was quite sincere about his faith. And I thought, wow, that's really amazing. He had had a bit of an impact on my life, and you'll read about that in my article in the blog. So, just lost my screen up here. A couple of other things I was going to say. These days in sport, lots of top sporting teams have chaplains. And in fact, a few years ago, just get rid of that up there. A few years ago, I was thinking about becoming a chaplain in the sports chaplaincy role that is available these days, but I thought better of it in the end and decided not to. And looking back now, I think that was probably the right decision for me. But there's a guy called Mark Tronson, who for many years was the chaplain to the Australian cricket team, and he had a terrific influence on cricketers. And you'll find some of his interviews with cricketers on YouTube, including Peter Gore. Is it Peter Gore? No. I'll put the link down underneath. 2 Metre Peter they called him. I've forgotten what Peter's last name is now, but that you can probably find that interview on. He famously got in his only Test match, I think, he got Sachin Tendulkar out, and that was pretty wonderful, really. So, yeah, so he had a big influence, and you can find some of his interviews on YouTube, as I said. So, I'm coming back now to, I'm just talking off the top of my head a bit. I did prepare a few notes to look at here. I don't know there's too many things that I've left out, except for, perhaps I'll read this one out from faith.Below. This is from an interview he did. He said, this is the former South African captain, and if you look on my blog, you'll see some photos I did when he made his famous first century in his debut test against Australia on Adelaide Oval. He says this, I'm quoting from something I found on the internet. He said, I know the reason I have success in this sport is solely due to Jesus, and I thank him every day for that. Du Plessis said that he grew up thinking he was a Christian, but it wasn't until he met a pastor who became his friend that he understood what it meant to have a relationship with Jesus. The pastor explained what Jesus' love really looks like. Once I understood this powerful truth, I chose to get baptized. My heart instantly changed as I gave my life to Christ and started understanding the truths of God much more clearly, as I found a new completeness in Christ, something I'd never experienced before. I wanted to change the way I lived my life to be in alignment with these truths. Du Plessis says he often finds himself as the only Christ follower on his teams, and it's tough to not have fellow believers to pray with for support, but he knows God has him in the high profile position he's in for a reason. I know that my purpose is about more than the runs I score on the cricket field. I hope to be able to spend the time with people to show them the love of Jesus and see his love shine through them as well. There you go. It's a powerful statement, isn't it? So I'm just going to read this from I was talking about this book before, Neil Hawke, Bowled Over. It talks about his story really, growing up in Adelaide and touring and playing football and with West Torrens and cricket with Port Adelaide and cricket with Australia and South Australia. But I'm just going to finish off by reading this article here. Now, it's probably a little bit sad. I mean, sometimes people find Christianity early in life. I was 28, so that wasn't all that early. And Neil Hawke, towards the end of his life, when he, through his wife, he became a Christian, and he missed out probably in many ways on having a faith throughout his younger life. But this was a powerful testimony. When he came to our church, I did a recording of the tape of the talk that he gave. He showed slides of his illness and how he overcame it and everything as well. And I have a copy of that tape. One day I might post it on my Christian channel as to when he spoke at the Edwardstown Church of Christ. Just going to read this. This is this article here. Born Again Hawke toasts victory after greatest test. Just read this out. This was by Trevor Gill and pictures by Ray Titus. This is the Adelaide News, which doesn't exist anymore. Thursday, September the 16th, 1982. Ray Titus, of course, was one of our famous sports photographers. Neil Hawke, and I'll just show you this close-up of him and his wife Beverly there. Neil Hawke, the miracle man, has emerged victorious from his astonishing battle against death. After an eternity of anguish and despair through an illness that shocked the sporting world, Hawke finally is off life support systems. For the first time in 2 years, the former Test cricketer and league football hero is eating normal food, without pumps and pipes to maintain a body tortured by bowel surgery and an agonising string of complications. Hawke no longer is in pain. And to celebrate the reality of an impossible dream, Hawkeye, it was his nickname, and his wife Bev are planning a honeymoon in the sunshine of Queensland's Gold Coast. They married last year when Hawke was fighting for his life. But Hawke refused to succumb many times. He had this illness, but Hawke refused to succumb many times. Amazing medical experts, and today at last farewelled the riveting period of torment since entering hospital for routine surgery in July 1980. It is really like being born again, Hawke said. Such a smile as big as his achievements on the sporting, with a smile as big as his achievements on the sporting field. The things I took for granted before I became sick have suddenly assumed new values in my life. Hopefully the whole thing is over, and I'm setting myself new goals to get back to a normal life. For the past 2 years, Hawke has lived on the concentrated ingredients of an intravenous drip. It maintained life while he had most of his intestines removed or reshaped. Through his life and death surgery, when his heart stopped up to 3 times a day, when he hemorrhaged with a 100-pint transfusion of blood and endured septicemia and pneumonia. And today, excuse me, today, things like spaghetti on toast, a chicken leg, even a sandwich have become almost a thrill of a lifetime. I'm taking it slowly at first, with food like mornay's, chicken, fish and mashed veggies, he said. It's a trial and error to see what I can and can't eat. It is even magnificent to have a shower again, because for the past 2 years I could only be sponged for the fear of infection. Apart from the undying love and support of his wife Bev, Hawke revealed he had become a born-again Christian. He said there was an overriding factor that gave me peace even at times when I was being wheeled in for surgery, and that was trusting in the Lord. We have not gone all religious, but I believe we could not have gone through the past 2 years without this great faith. The letters of support and prayers from people all over the world have been unbelievable. Hawke said he planned to help lead a testimonial church service at which he would recount the experiences of the past 2 years at the Assemblies of God Church at Campbelltown. And that was going to be on February the 6th, and then and when some of the biggest names in South Australian sport would attend. So there you go. I'd like to finish there. Just a little bit about being a Christian in sport, a little bit about my experience, but also about the experience of others. And I think it's interesting to see and watch the behaviour of people. I mean, it's very hard when you're a young Christian to not be influenced by the world. People like Manus, you know, you're thrust on a pedestal when you become a famous sportsman. And even as a young person, when I played football and young people would come up to me and ask me for an autograph, that didn't happen very often, but it did, that turns your head. And you really have to be on your guard to not get caught up with the worldly pursuits of being a Christian in sport. So to all you Christians who are playing sport out there, I'm glad you are. And to those who are thinking about becoming a Christian but still playing sport, give it some give it some consideration. So once again, thanks for watching. Like if you like, subscribe if you wish, and I'll see you next time.